Hello fellow photographers. I know that you love a great silhouette photo. Everyone does. But do you know how to take the perfect one? Or have you had disappointing results when trying to photograph the most beautiful sunset? You review a photo afterwards and it's a bland version of what you saw. Then this video is for you. Stay tuned. I'll be giving you 6 tips for taking incredible silhouette photos. And at the end, I'll give you the best camera settings to use, including what to do when your camera refuses to focus in strong backlight, which is a very common problem. I'm Danielle. I'm a professional wildlife photography instructor in Africa, from Africa, and I design and lead photo safaris throughout my home continent for photographers of all skill levels. The first tip is that the background has to be brighter than the subject. Many photographers believe you have to be facing the sun to get a silhouette, but that's not true. A bright background can be anything from light sand, water, mist, bright sky. Even when there's no sun visible, you can still get great silhouettes. Secondly, shape identifies subject. You need to know what you're looking at purely by looking at the shape of it. The colors and setting can be magnificent, but if you're unable to tell what your subject is, the photo loses impact. For example, make sure to see the elephant's tusks, the head and tail of the cheetah, the eagle's beak shape. This doesn't mean you need to show the whole animal. You can silhouette just bits of it, but the viewer still knows what it is. For example, this rhino here. The horns tell you exactly what it is. Separation of subjects. This is so important when photographing more than one subject. I'd say this is much harder than taking a photo of just one animal, but it can be just as rewarding. Seeing that shape identifies the subject, you want to be able to identify all the subjects in a grouping, which means that separation is key. It's not the end of the world if there's overlap here and there, but when you end up with a 2-headed, 8-legged elephant, that's a problem. This is where patience really comes into play. Often just watching and observing leads to the perfect moment when the little elephant separates momentarily from mom, or the giraffes position themselves perfectly. Take this as an example. One of my favorite images I've ever taken. I saw this lone tree on the horizon, which is a beautiful silhouette in itself. But then I noticed a few giraffes approaching the tree. We actually didn't have a great deal of time to wait, but I insisted on it because I could just see the photo in my mind's eye, and I'm so happy that I did because the giraffes came walking right into frame. Sometimes they weren't ideally spaced, but other times the composition worked well. Sometimes there were 4 in the frame, other times only 3. Then one would bend down and become a black blob, while the others were well silhouetted, but in the end, thanks to patience, we managed to get some great images from this scene. Patience pays off. Now for an important one, your camera's light metering mode. It's a topic that gets slightly technical, and I've made 2 videos to explain this topic in detail. But in a nutshell, you should set your camera to read the light from the whole frame and have it decide on the exposure by means of an average of all the lights and all the darks in the scene. This is called evaluative or matrix or ESP or multimetering, and it's my preferred metering mode for the areas that I photograph in at least. By using this mode, you won't have to change much when pointing at a bright scene in order to get a perfect silhouette. Obviously, this depends greatly on the balance of lights versus darks in the frame, but generally with silhouettes, the majority of the frame will be taken up by bright tones. The camera will compensate for all the brightness by making the whole scene darker, and your subject will end up as a dark silhouette automatically. Sometimes you might want to include more dark tones than light tones, in which case you'd need to apply exposure compensation to darken the image. As a demonstration, next time you're out, point your camera to the sky and include a little bit of dark shadowed foreground and take a photo. Then change your composition to include mostly dark foreground and a little bit of sky. Compare the results and you'll see exactly how it works. If you have a mirrorless camera, you can just look through the viewfinder and see the live changes to exposure when you change your composition. I'm not a fan of spot metering, personal choice through experience, and especially in the case of silhouettes, it'll make your life really difficult. I elaborate on this in my light metering videos, so you're welcome to pop over there for a full explanation. Avoid dark areas in the background. We can't always choose our backgrounds, but it's best if you avoid backgrounds with dark areas because your subject or parts of it will disappear into the background and then you lose your shape that's necessary for identification. Yes, you will be able to edit a little bit back afterwards, but it's best to get it right in camera. Lastly, move your feet. Get low. Often this helps to elevate your subject and drop the dark horizon down if you're photographing something on the ground. Maybe getting low is not necessary, but you might need to move just a few meters this way or that way to clear the animal out of the dark patches. Always keep an eye on your background and make adjustments when you need to. Please remember to subscribe to the channel and click on the bell so that you don't miss out on the next videos. Now I'll be giving you the camera settings which I found to be the best. It's actually very simple with silhouettes and it's difficult to go wrong. Because you'll be facing a bright area, your shutter speed wouldn't have to drop too low, your aperture can stay at an average and your ISO will also remain quite low. As a guideline, shutter speed will definitely be above 1,000th of a second, even faster if your subject is moving. Aperture starting off say at f8 and ISO around 400. As for exposure compensation, you wouldn't have to do much if you're on evaluative metering and your photo is dominated by light tones. However, if you do choose to compose with mostly dark tones, the camera will automatically lighten up the photo and you'll have to dial in negative exposure compensation. As for the sun, when it's still quite high, I exclude it from the photo, but as soon as it gets closer to the horizon, I generally include it. Remember, if you're facing the sun, your exposure will change dramatically as soon as the sun dips below the horizon. Your settings then change to typical low light settings, slower shutter, larger aperture and higher ISO, and very importantly, no exposure compensation. As you can see, these settings are straightforward. The most difficult part of silhouettes is the focus. Cameras generally struggle to autofocus when pointing to bright backlit scenes, especially the mirrorless cameras, at least now, for the moment. When you notice your camera struggling to acquire focus, hunting for focus, then you have a few options. Put your focus point on a contrasty border, where light meets dark. This is easier for the autofocus than placing it in the dark area of your subject. Try to find the contrasty area closest to the face or the eyes of your subject. Another option is to switch to a cluster of focus points if you are using just a single focus point. One of the 5 or 9 points or whatever your camera has available should latch onto the subject. If this doesn't work, switch to manual focus. Remember to switch it on your lens and your camera if that's how your particular setup works. That's it, folks. I hope you feel inspired to get out there and practice capturing beautiful silhouettes. Until next time, keep well. Bye-bye.